Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of When I Grew Up. On today's episode, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend and guest, Andrew Song. Hey Andrew, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you for having me here on 108. I don't know why I took 108 episodes, but I'm glad to be here.
No, you're absolutely right. I owe you an apology. It's very belated. No, because your brother was episode number 2 on my podcast or 3 or something.
You know what I think it is? I think it's because you knew I would I'm always a go-to person. Like if you needed somebody to fill in a spot, like I could, and you just haven't needed to fill in a spot.
No, that is not true, Andrew.
Seems to be true. It seems 107 other people.
Oh my goodness.
But
you're so funny.
I'm excited. It's like we mentioned before, it's just been awesome to kind of see, the progression and, hearing all the stories. And a lot of my friends, obviously my wife was on it, my sister-in-law, my brother, countless number of friends. And now I have the esteemed pleasure to kind of to talk. But I realized again, I was a pastor for so many years. There's so many pastors that you could have talked to before, and I get it. That's fine.
Well, no. Well, okay. Well, all that to say, I appreciate it, and your comments are way too kind. But yes, your entire family at this point has been on the podcast.
True. This is very true.
But all that to say, it's because your family is filled with extremely passionate and amazing people. And I've been so privileged to have them on to hear their stories and journeys. And now it's your turn. And okay. You're not wrong. I've been trying to interview pastors that aren't from the Atlanta area because I feel like, my community of listeners that are from Atlanta, if they want to be a pastor, I'm like, go talk to your pastor. You don't need to hear them on a podcast. But all that to say, I'm excited to talk to you because I know things have been in transition for you.
Yes,
and a lot's been going on, and I want to hear the pastoral stuff too, if you don't mind, but I definitely want to get into the last year of your life.
It's interesting because I think, when you were doing this podcast and when I, was like, man, when can I get on this podcast?
Stop.
It's also one of those things where you can't just reach out and be like, hey, can I be on your podcast? It feels very vain.
No, it totally is. So you could have done that.
I'm just going to wait, I'm going to wait to, get the invite and officially do it. But, it's interesting because the theme, when I grew up, truthfully for me, from probably 17, I felt like life was leading towards ministry and becoming a pastor. And a lot of that had to do with family upbringing and just the things that I feel like my mom wanted and desired from me. So, there's a lot there that I hope we can get into, but for the most part, like you said, transition really in the past 6 months into a non-ministry role for a variety of different reasons that, I'm honestly still kind of processing through. I feel like I was able to get to the best place possible to make a honest decision that was, I don't want to say it was life-changing per se, but at the moment, it definitely felt like the tectonic plates of my life were shifting, and kind of disrupted a bunch of different things. But, God still was very clear. And, I felt very affirmed and humbled through the whole process. And so really, for your listeners, for me, I was a pastor for about 9 years here in Atlanta and really 2.5 years before that in Chicago, serving as, your traditional youth ministry EM pastor. And it was at the beginning of this year that I had transitioned out of that and started a new career kind of in corporate retail space that has become, something very, meaningful for me. I enjoy it. I work for the PGA Tour Superstore in their home office, which is amazing because our family not only is passionate about what they do, but we all love playing golf. So it has become sort of this interesting marriage between career and hobbies, which, I never thought would happen, and I don't think it happens for a lot of people per se, but it's been quite the process in the past 6 months for sure.
So before we get into the thick of it, because I do have a lot of questions,
Of course,
and um, as someone that's in ministry currently too, that I know how much effort and investment and time it takes to do ministry. I think I mean, I'm kind of being careful with my words here, but yeah, like
yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
see results, I guess. And so, to say that you did that for 11 years,
Mhm.
right? And then transitioned into um like not very far away from a ministry role, right?
Yeah.
Um in almost like corporate setting. I'm curious to like how the emotional aspect of it too. But before we get into all that, you said you work at the PGA
Tour
home
Superstore.
store,
Yeah, their home
home
office,
office.
which is called the Store Support Center.
Okay.
For lack of better terms, it's the corporate office for the retail shops of the PGA Tour Superstore.
Okay.
Because
Oh man, why is this like the most perfect job for you? That is so
I don't
crazy.
know, it was one of those things again, part of the affirmation process.
Yeah.
Kind of right place, right time, but again, I'm not a big coincidence type of guy. It definitely, kudos to a friend named Gina who's
Also been on the podcast.
been on the podcast. You're right. I think her husband's been on the podcast as well, Edward. Has
Yes,
he
yes,
not?
correct. Yeah.
Yes, okay. And so it was crazy. So I transitioned into a role there, basically soon after my time at 4 Points,
Mhm.
which, wasn't the plan, wasn't the intention, but a lot of it, it was kind of like I didn't want to miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt like God was just kind of leading me there. And it sounds weird to say, not to overly spiritualize it, but I look back on the process and I knew like if I took my 3 months, now I wouldn't have been as productive as I had wanted to,
Mm.
and so on and so forth. And
Yeah, yeah.
it wasn't anything like ministry related. A few people have told me, no, it sounds like you're jaded with church, but truthfully, it's hard for me to say that it was because I
Mm.
didn't feel like it was.
Mhm.
It was just a few different things and perspectives that shifted for me, that allowed for me to be free in making this choice.
Mhm.
It definitely, the ministry weight started to bear a little bit heavier,
Mhm.
coming off of COVID, coming off of just a variety of different things.
Sure.
I felt like, if it was ever going to be a time, this would be the time. Um, but then it was also humbling to know that, hey, I'm not doing this because I feel like I have to or like God needs me to do it. It was one of those things where, just through a few different conversations with my family, with my brother, with Mimi, obviously my wife, it was one of those things where like, hey, God doesn't need me to be a pastor. It was, hey, can I process through this transition in a way that was healthy, and
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
a way in which was affirming to the church, affirming to my family, and obviously myself. And it's been one emotional up and down sort of roller coaster ride that
Mhm.
some days I feel like, oh, this is the best decision. Other days I'm kind of like, I wonder what ministry would be like. What does that look like now? And so at the end of the day, like it's, and there is a little bit of vagueness because I want to, keep a little bit of respect towards, my church community
Of
and
course.
them understanding like, the process
Yeah,
that I had to
yeah,
make.
yeah, yeah.
Cause it's tough,
Mm.
actually me and my wife started going back to the church just as regular attendees. And
Oh,
actually
that's
it's been
awesome.
hugely affirming as well.
Yeah.
Just in the whole process, I honestly had to just sit back and be like, dude, it's not really a big deal, and
Mm.
for me to think it'd be a big deal only shows kind of the hubris that I was kind of carrying, or, pride of thinking like, oh, I can't go back. Like it would, mess a bunch of stuff up. But in reality, it's like, come on, Andrew, I wasn't that big of a deal. So a lot of humility in it, to be honest. So,
Man, yeah, I mean, I feel like I get what you're saying. It's not a
mhm,
big deal. But at the same
mhm.
time, like um It would be hard, I feel, to be so heavily invested in something
Yeah, yeah.
and then kind of go back and yeah, it would be hard. I don't know
It's,
how
I
to
mean, don't get me
articulate it.
wrong. Like, it's definitely still tough because, even when I sit back and I think about it, just kind of like I mentioned earlier, the story for me is like, I knew I was going to be a pastor. Like, that
Yeah,
was going to be the trajectory of my life. Started college knowing seminary and then starting church, and, led me to go to Chicago for seminary and undergrad. And then me and Mimi got married and we started 4 Points here, or she started 4 Points. I came on staff in
that's right.
2013
Mhm.
and have kind of helped support and grown the community to kind of what it was kind of early part of January.
Mm.
And so, I think anytime anyone ever puts that much time and effort and, sweat equity and, into anything, like, it's going to be hard to remove yourself from that.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing for me, kind of like what it means for me to grow up, especially in a ministry context,
Mhm.
kind of goes back to the thing like, God didn't need me to be there, right? It wasn't like the church is actually, it's growing, right? Like, there's far more different people. And I had to think of it as like, man, did I hold the church back from getting to a certain place or whatnot? But it also is just humbling to know, like, hey, God's still going to invest and do what he does within the church. And, as me and Mimi have kind of come back, like, there are people who are newer to the church who's involved that I don't know.
Mhm.
And it's exciting and it's awesome to
Yeah.
see that. And so
Yeah.
part of my like growing up process has been like understanding, hey, there's seasons and things. There's, you know, God's plan is far bigger, but yet super intimate in my life because, I get to be a part of something, but then also recognize, hey, there's other things that I can also be a part of, based upon where I am at in my life and family and such. Right.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you, but there are parts of me that I will admit that when you told me that you were going to leave ministry, I was disappointed because I feel
Of
like
course.
yeah, like and Mimi have so much to offer in that area and
Sure.
are gifted and talented and in so many ways, right? In impacting this community in Atlanta in the capacity that you were before. And you can still do that. I know that. I
Yeah.
know that. But at the same time, right, there's like this kind of a little bit removed,
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
honest. And so like as you know, my EM pastor recently transitioned out of ministry as well. And
Uh-huh.
so it was around the same time. And I was like, whoa, like, what is
Uh-huh.
happening? What is happening? And I think for me, like, even with my own EM pastor that transitioned out, it was hard for me to swallow because
Yeah.
of like, I'd like to believe that those that step into ministry or go to seminary and do the work, like
Yeah.
they do have calling over their lives, right? And so I just, yeah, it was hard for me to completely understand, right? Like the workings of God in
Yeah.
those moments.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think I can't speak for you, but I believe that it's true from what you're saying.
Yeah.
In my position, oh, I've never said this in public, honestly. But
There's a sacredness to podcasting space.
yes, okay.
Everything's there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like, yeah, I think and I'm sorry for the vocabulary if you don't understand my Christianese right now, but yeah, as my old pastor obeyed the Holy Spirit and obeyed God in whatever way that he did, there has been like blessing and favor
Yeah.
like that I've witnessed, right? Like
Of course.
testimonies coming out of that
Yeah.
situation, whether it's for his family or my church, that I'm like, I can't deny, right? Like
Of course.
God is good and
Yeah.
he does everything with purpose. And I feel like that's what you're saying right now,
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's the redemptive quality of God that, I
Hmm.
think a lot of Christians believe in. But I feel like for some pastors, it's harder to believe. And what I mean by that is, you know, the ministry is a tough industry, right? And, some people may disagree in the way I describe it, but there are organizational characteristics about a career pastor, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And there are, the best way that I put it is like if you look at church as an industry and you put that side by side behind every other sort of industry out there,
Mm-hmm.
like being a pastor is incredibly tough. I
Mm.
think when you add the spiritual accountability and then the calling of it, there's just for many people it becomes too much weight to bear.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's an excuse. And maybe it's my generation who's sort of too soft to be able to kind of handle that how to weight, because the reality is there's no young pastors out there anymore,
Mm.
right? And I will confess, like when my friends started stepping away from ministry, I'm like, dude, I'm so happy for you, but it's kind of like another one bites the dust. Couldn't
Mm.
handle it. I get where they are, and
Mm.
now here I am on the other side of the line, and maybe there is a jadedness that comes out and speaks, and if it is, like I just may have to be honest with it, but it's it just kind of bears so heavily to
Mm.
where I realized for myself earlier in the year, like I can still fulfill this calling over my life that God has put
Mm.
in the same sort of capacity as if I'm doing it, outside of the pulpit, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the career path for a pastor just no longer, I feel like, resembles a career path that many young people in their 30s are willing to now decide and choose when you put that next to sort of the impact it has on both your life and family and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm for those who are in that time, like mad props and huge respects to them. Like a lot of close friends of mine are still in pastoral care, and they're incredibly gifted in those things. And I love the fact that they're still in it. But for me, at the beginning of the year, when I was looking at my family, when I was looking at, the quote unquote career path for
Mm-hmm.
myself and how that weighs in relation to my ability to do God's work,
Mm-hmm.
even though God's work may look different, I felt that freedom to be able to say, you know what, I can still do those things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The past 6 months have been tough because a lot of that, to be honest, has been on the back burner
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, like I said, if podcast is a safe place, like I love a Sunday morning just being able to kind of attend church or have the ability to kind of do
Yeah.
things, like
Yeah.
there is being on the other side of the line a little bit of some joy and um, relief, if that makes sense.
No, that's so good. I'm so like it makes me so happy
Yeah,
that
and I'm sure your former EM pastor can kind of feel very similar, right?
mm,
Like being off the clock means being off the clock when in ministry, not always the case, right? And
mm,
you know, there are elements of the ministry life that I do miss, right? Like, is my work as fulfilling as what it was when I was doing, pastoral ministry? Like some days, probably not, but other days, like I might be justifying it, but I would say like, yeah, I feel like I'm making certain impacts in life. But there's a lot of balls that are sort of being juggled in the air right now when
mm,
it comes to God's calling in my life and versus the next path, and what does it look like to transition, especially out of ministry, but doing it in a way that I know that I can affirm the church community, right? Or the pastoral.
mm,
Because, I appreciate what you said about, Mimi and I. Like, I still feel like there are things that I can offer to the church.
absolutely, yeah.
There's some space that I might need, but I'm trying to envision, like, me and Mimi were talking, like, hey, what does it look like next for us?
Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, it's like, if my daughter wants to go to 4 Points, like, we're going to 4 Points, but if she wakes up, it's like, hey, I want to go to a different one. I'm like, let's go to a different one. Like, I
Mm,
feel like if she wants to go to church, that's a plus. Doesn't matter where right now. Like, it
mm-hmm.
really doesn't. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're landed. But like I said, there's a lot there,
Yeah.
and I'm sure, we can get into it in a whole bunch of different ways.
So like okay, so let's talk about like oh actually before
Mhm.
sorry. What are you like so what are you doing right now? Like what does your typical day look like for you?
So that's a good question. So my current role is an operations program manager at the PGA Tour Superstore.
Oh, wow.
And the way, no, it's not that fancy. So the way that I explain it is, so our store support center supports 54 stores across the country.
Okay.
And each store obviously has its own leadership team, general managers, assistant general managers. So there are teams who focus on merchandising, apparel, the employees and, all of those things.
Uh-huh.
I find my job to fill in some of those cracks, things that just kind of get pushed to people's like corner of their desk. And I just kind of help facilitate those communications. And there are
Mm.
specific programs that we run throughout the year that are just kind of in between certain departments. And then so I'll work with a couple of different departments that we have just to ensure that that communication is clear.
Mhm.
More so for the operations of side, so like more so working with the people and the employees and processes. So it has nothing to do with clubs or clothes or anything like that, but it has everything to do with our associates and our employees.
Wow.
Yeah.
Basically the last 9 years of your life.
It was funny. I mean, it's super interesting, and this is the big sort of affirmation process because this job sort of opened up, my friend Gina was like, "Hey, you'd be a great fit for this operations role. Currently, this person only focuses on logistics and travel and kind of just program management,
Uh-huh.
and I think you could bring a lot to the table." I was like, "That's fantastic. I'll apply." So I had an interview on a Thursday at 1.
Uh-huh.
That went for about like an hour. They called me back at like 2:45 and was like, "Hey, do you want the job? Can you start on Monday?" And I was like, "Of course I can start the job. Of course I'm going to take this." And
Wow.
so that was pretty quick after my final Sunday at church. And I was like, I might need a little bit more time, but there were some things that gave me a little bit more space, some rest. And so, yeah. So basically what ended up happening was just kind of managing a lot of programs and people from a relational side more than anything
Yeah.
else, right? And like you said, the past 9 years really helped equip me to be able to, bring value to a company that I didn't think I could, which is crazy. But it was one of those things that was like a perfect fit. That's why, I started so quickly after.
Wow, that's
I passed the
amazing.
opportunity up.
I mean, like, I just love stories like that because, I mean, honestly, that seems like a really affirmed transition by God, right? Like,
Yeah, sure.
honestly, like, because it doesn't happen that like that for everybody.
No, no. It's crazy because the past like few weeks I've been traveling and one of my main roles on these business trips is just leading a strength finders session.
What is that?
So strength
Strength
finders,
finders, like a
yeah, strength finder.
personality thing?
Yeah, like what is it? Like you take an assessment, they give you 5 strengths.
Okay.
It's like a small white and red book. It's by a company called Clifton Gallup. You may have seen it. Strength Finders 2.0 is basically
Okay,
what it is.
okay. It sounds familiar, but
Yeah, so it's like a assessment that pinpoints your top 5 strengths according to certain orientations that you might have as a leader. So it's leadership
oh,
development,
I
right?
need that.
So for the past like 3-4 weeks, it's been about coming in front of our general managers
Uh-huh.
and just supporting them by helping them develop as leaders.
Wow.
Like how can they better manage and lead their team so that they themselves can lead others, which is
Yes.
like in the church space is this discipleship,
That's
right?
discipleship right there.
So I was talking to my wife, I was like, it feels like I'm kind of helping develop 54 small groups,
Yes.
like 54 small group leaders and their small groups and such. And that actually helped me pivot a little bit of my thought process and how to approach this. And,
Mm.
because a lot of, in the church space, we talk a lot about development and leadership and personalities and different things like that. But not many times in the corporate space do they give, leaders the opportunity to like dive into this, for themselves as a group, as a company.
Right.
And so, that allows for me to stand in front of them and be like, "Hey, what are your 5 strengths? Like, how do you see that happening in your life?" So it really feels like leadership development seminars that we would do in church,
Yeah.
which is great because there's good responses. People, find, growth. And that's what I mean. There's some parts of my job that are very affirming and very meaningful because I get to kind of walk alongside some of these individuals who are learning things about themselves that, 20 years in their career, they've never spent the time to do that.
Yeah.
And you get to sort of live those like aha moments they get to have. And those have been incredibly, awesome to be a part of. So it's just trying to figure out like, what does that look like on a corporate scale? Because I
Okay.
can't like call them up and spend an hour with all of them,
Right, right, right.
Or like I can't fly to these places and like follow up and have coffee with them like we would do at church. But like,
Mm.
it's just trying to figure out how to scale it on an
But
organization level.
that is so exciting. Like,
Yes.
I feel like that would be so exciting to do. Man, so cool. But like, um, okay. What's kind of exciting for me to hear about is how successful the transition has been,
Hmm.
and really encouraging. I feel like um, that's always the hardest part, right? I mean, you literally had a full life and career before you started this new one.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, you've only been doing it for 6 months, but I
Yeah.
don't know, and I don't know where it's going to take you.
Oh, I'm a
Or
life.
do
I'll tell you
you,
right
do
now.
you have an
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah, I'm gonna be here forever.
Okay.
Like once they fire me, like I can't necessarily see my. And part of it also is because, and I tell this to Mimi a lot. Like, let's say I was working for Coca-Cola or Home Depot
Uh-huh.
or Delta, even some of like the big companies here in Atlanta that a lot of people like working for. Like, I couldn't see myself being in those companies and focusing on like flights or
Mm,
home. Like it's so much more fun because like I'm in golf,
right.
but my job has to do with people, right? So
Yeah.
like I get to tickle the itch of hobbies, but still find like the fulfillment and joy in working with people and planning and logistics and stuff like
Yeah.
that and operations because that was one of the things I feel like I was pretty good at when it came to church, like making sure we could plan a retreat or do all those things. Like
Of
those are sort of
course.
second nature to me.
Yeah.
So to be able to still do that, but also have fun in the sense of like, we get a discount
Yeah.
or, we're having to figure out how to make sure, a very exclusive putter is coming out. So like, how do we make sure like everyone's fair, and just like being around those sort of conversations, because for me, like I was a customer there for so long,
Right,
you know,
right.
and so now being on the other side of it, like, I don't think anybody who's there listens to this, but like, I'm there as long as they'll have me to
Yeah.
be.
I'm
Um,
sure they'll have you for a long time. But okay,
hopefully,
so
hopefully.
sidebar, just a quick sidebar. Is PGA Superstore owned by Arthur Blank?
It is. Yep.
Oh, so that's
Yeah.
why Gina got you this job or
Yes. Oh, so
recommended you.
Gina works for the PGA Tour Superstore. So for those people who are listening or interested, Arthur Blank, who owns the Atlanta Falcons, he owns the Atlanta United. He also built Mercedes Benz,
Yes.
right, stadium, and there's a few other businesses that he owns under his Arthur Blank family of business.
Umbrella.
Yeah, over the big umbrella, PGA Tour Superstore is one of those businesses in that umbrella.
Ah,
So he
okay.
was an investor a few years ago when they were struggling, and he came in and he ended up taking it over.
I see. I see.
Yeah, so for the longest time, people thought Home Depot owned PGA Tour Superstore, but Arthur Blank, who used to be with Home Depot,
Now.
he's owner of that. Right.
Gotcha, gotcha.
So,
Okay.
like I said, like there are benefits like free Falcons tickets and free United tickets and stuff and concerts and so there's a lot of
That sounds
like
worth it.
things that are that allow for me to have fun with it, but
Uh-huh.
still like I'm not data entering. I'm not doing data entry or anything
Right,
like
right.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's been the most affirming part of this,
No,
right?
truly, truly. I'm like really, I'm not exaggerating. I'm actually really in shock. Like how perfectly aligned it was and the
Yeah,
timing of it all.
for sure.
But like I do want to talk about like even though it was kind of an easier transition for
Yeah,
you, the initial kind of like sure it's ministry, but with anything, like I mentioned before, like so much investment was made. You had
yeah,
a whole career before this one. Like to just kind of lay it down and be like, "Hey, I'm going to take a break and see what happens. Like, what was that process for you? Because I feel like that's really scary. Even for
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
listening, maybe they're like, hey, I haven't been doing it for 12 years, but I've been doing it for 5. And it's scary for me to think about dropping everything. Sorry for the vocabulary, but
No,
but and like moving on to something else or not knowing what's going to
yeah,
happen.
yeah.
Like, what would you say to them?
It for me, it took a lot of conversations, right? Like
Mm,
probably at the beginning of November. Like if I look back on the entire process, one of the things that sparked it was I had a moment within the ministry that really kind of shook me pretty bad.
okay.
I was like, dude, why is this? Why can't I shake this situation? Right? I had
Mm,
a, I had a really tough conversation with somebody at church, and I just couldn't shake it.
mm,
And then what ended up happening is that started to affect my relationship with my daughter. Like I was very short tempered. I was very just like I blew up at her,
oh my
and then it was one of
goodness.
those things where Mimi was like, hey, "Listen, like what is going on?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And
Mm,
so I was so imbalanced when it came to my emotional health and a bunch of different things that I actually started to see a therapist in November just to kind of help me organize sort of these conversations and like, hey, what's going
mm,
on? What is happening? And that kind of led to this I don't want to say frustration, but like I started to feel like I was grinding away at ministry, right? Like
mm,
just grinding away at at my job. And then I was like, well, this was never my intentions, right? Like I don't think it was as um, joyful for our community for me to sort of be half there, if that makes sense. And so I started seeing a therapist, really helped me process through a lot of things.
mm.
And then what happened at the end of the year was there was COVID. Well, me and my wife caught COVID right at the end of the year, and so that kind of made us stay home for a prolonged period of time. So I
I
had to stay
see.
away from the church for a prolonged period of time and just kind of do my things, at home and remote or so on and so forth. And then the next week that I came back, I was actually serving in our children ministry, so it was like really detached from the community again. And then the following week, I believe it was, there was like a big storm during MLK that we as a church sort of decided, like, hey, we probably aren't going to have in person
A
service.
snowstorm.
Yeah,
There was a
snowstorm.
snowstorm.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
so there was just so much time that passed by where it was just like, man, I don't know. Not being away from the church really kind of refreshed my soul,
Yeah.
but not in a way where it was just like, okay, I'm ready to get back there. But it was just like, man, being this far away, what does my life look like with it not being there, right, on the ministry
Mm,
side, and which prompted me to sort of have conversations with both Mimi. I kind of started with the like closest person in my life, which was my wife. Then I talked to my brother, and we talked for like
mm.
2 hours on the phone, and we rarely, I mean, we may not even talk for 2 hours in person, to be honest. Like so we were on the phone. Actually, we had like two or three different phone calls. So I was talking to him,
Mm,
just helping me process through that. Talk to my therapist.
mm,
Talk to my parents, and it really was my conversation with my parents where I was like, I'm thinking about leaving ministry. I hope, and I literally said this. I was like, I hope you can forgive me. And then my
mm,
mom was just like, why on earth would you say that? And I was just like, because I thought you'd be disappointed. And she was like, that's the furthest from the truth, right? And we
mm.
had to work through a bunch of different things to where I left that conversation feeling like that much more weight off of my shoulders.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening was my conversation with my senior pastor was not if I was going to step down, it was more so like, hey, when will I step back, or when will I step
Mm,
down from the church, right? So it was like,
mm,
you know, metaphorically saying, not metaphor, like literally, I went from, hey, I'm thinking about resigning to printing out my resignation letter, right?
mm,
And looking back on it, one of the things that I feel like I could have done differently was possibly talking to him, early on.
mhm,
But like I mentioned to him, I told a few other people this. I was like, I had to start with the people who were closest to me.
mhm,
It was my brother, my family, my
mhm,
wife.
mhm.
Kind of my therapist, kind of who was helping me process through all these things. And then by the time I got to sort of that exterior layer, there was a point where I was just like, there's so much more peace here,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
me and Pastor Peter are still, we're still good. There wasn't
Mm,
any sort of animosity. Obviously, me and him working together for 9 years, there was definitely some shock there, which,
of course.
part of me wishes I could have hedged that a little bit differently. But like I said, the process led me to sort of have this internal conversation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And kind of going, and that's a long-winded way to sort of answer your question. And the reason why I say that is because when I realized when it comes to career shift for me, I had to detach this personal identity aspect of it. So I
Yes.
was, I wasn't Andrew who was a pastor. Like there was so much a part of me that was like, I'm a pastor and I can't be anything else. And
Mm,
I think one of the golden nuggets that I took away from my therapy that like I was like worth of every dollar that I spent was being able to say the words just like, man, I don't have to be a pastor. And
mm,
then, he was there. I remember distinctly being in that room when I said it. And he even told me, he was like, after you said it, it felt like your shoulders just kind of like rolled back, and there was just
mm,
this ease and weight kind of being taken off of this
yeah.
this pressure of feeling like, hey, this is the only thing I have to do. Like this is the thing I have to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not naive to believe that I had the flexibility to switch careers, right? Like going into a place of unknown. I know there's a lot of people who don't have that luxury, but for me, it was one of those things where, you know, Mimi was very supportive and she was just like, listen, like we'll figure it out. And
Mm,
that to me was just like, all right, let me go down this journey. Because
wow.
if she was very uneasy about it, both financially and for our family, then it would obviously be a different conversation I would have had. But she was like, hey, like I'm supportive of you. I understand, like, what this process is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what the next step is. And I think that's where our faith really came in, where
Sure.
we felt like, you know what, God, like, I'm going to go down this path and I don't know if it's the right one, but I'm going to trust you're going to steer me one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally a dinner where a friend, Gina, was like, listen, this job's coming up. Would you, like, my predecessor didn't even leave yet. And like my first day was her last day.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's
it was
crazy.
literally like, best case scenario for me,
Yeah.
best case scenario for the company, because there was a lot that she was doing that I really kind of had to jump into. And so, to anyone I would say who's listening, who's like in the middle of a career path, like I would say like trust your instinct, right?
Mm,
Trust like the core of who you are.
mm-hmm.
And if that's one of those things that, you haven't ever had to do, then find some guidance,
Yeah.
find a counselor, find somebody that you trust, not the person who's going to tell you what you want to hear, but like somebody who can sit down and be like, this job is ruining your life. Or, hey, I think this is just a season where you just kind of have to grow and evolve from,
Mm-hmm.
or it might be one of those conversations of like, you've been talking about a career path and you just need to, do it, take the risk. And, if they're of a faith, trusting that God can redeem those things.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said, especially when it comes to church, like there was a redemptive quality about God that is surfaced so much here that I feel like my relationship with him has actually grown and has
Mm,
deepened, because now it's given me a bigger perspective of what does the church look like? And that's a different conversation, right? Like what does ministry look like for the next 20 years,
yeah.
right? So when the current senior pastor community, like when they get too old and when there's the, 30 something pastors who are going to be taking on that baton, like what will the church look like then? Right?
Mm,
Is there a space for somebody like me to continue to serve in a ministry capacity while, still enjoying this? Can we pivot and evolve in a way in which young people who love the Lord can serve in a pastoral component,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Without the weight and the, I don't want to say sacrifice because every job comes with a sacrifice, but like without the extra stuff that makes being a pastor so unattractive, if that makes sense, right?
Interesting.
And
This is another conversation.
Yeah, I
that
mean,
I'd love to have with you.
it's
But
one of those things where I understand like it's a hard conversation for me to have
uh,
because so many of my friends are still in ministry. And so it's easy for me to get out of, be out of the space
mhm.
and poke holes and be like, hey, these are the things that need to change, like, and I understand like change can happen from both in and out. But, from my perspective and my thought, like, is there a space to be innovative in a fundamental way? So I don't know what that looks like.
Mm,
Right. And I'm not trying to undercut any of the current ministries out there. Right. Like I
yeah.
think churches are needed now more than ever. Right.
Mhm.
But can we have an honest conversation about what does the next 15 years look like? Right.
Right.
What is the legacy of the Asian American church? Right. But like I said, that might open up a huge box that I want to open up. And I don't know if that's like, for episode 220 when it's just like, oh, guess what? I'm back, like in ministry. But I have no idea what that looks like.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I mean, like,
yeah.
okay, so definitely I've had this conversation with some people, and they're for whatever reason, no, it's not for whatever. My personality and just my ability to like I feel like you and several other pastors I know, like the way that you guys ministered and pastored, you guys were able to do that because you are visionaries, right? And I just like have a hard time
Yeah.
like looking to the future
Yeah.
in that way. So I don't know how to dialogue sometimes when it comes to
Sure.
this.
Yeah.
Unless like I'm given some like tidbits and like ideas and I'm like, oh, okay, I can see this happening,
Yeah.
expanding. But everything you're saying right now, and especially what you were saying before about yeah, like what is it gonna look like? Like for the
Yeah.
younger generation, are they going to need pastoral roles or are they going to like can we just kind
Yeah.
of rise up, you know? That's really interesting because
Yeah.
I
I don't.
I
I don't know. Like that's the beauty of it, I think.
yeah,
And I think for so long, and I can only speak about my 36 years in existence. Like churches looked a certain way, right?
sure.
But if
Same.
and if you look at, I mean, if you look at industries across the board, right? And I don't think we can look at churches. And I think this was one of the huge blessings of being in a corporate space.
Uh-huh.
It kind of brings back to the church in the sense of like when you look at just, I think, thriving industries of people and whatever it is, like you can generally gauge on where they're headed towards or
Mhm.
how they're going to pivot in ways in which they'll be impactful for the next 15, 20 years, right?
Mm, mhm.
But when it comes to the church, I feel like some of the difficulties or some of not even having the ability or the space to talk about it
Mm.
is like, what will the church look like in 15, 20 years? What are things that we can do now to help prepare that,
Yes. What can
without
we
like
do?
destroy. I'm not talking about destroy the church. I'm not saying like let's destroy everything about it and rebuild it. Like that's not what I'm saying. Like I'm not. I don't believe that to be the case.
Mhm.
But with everything that has happened for the past 3 or 4 years, when you're looking at like
Mm.
the future of leaders, right, and you're looking at like what's happening, and this is strictly only in American church or like
Mhm.
Western church, right?
Mhm.
Things around the world, like I don't have privy to the amazing things that are happening, and friends of mine have told me like this is truly an American church problem, which I get.
Mm.
um but what does that look like? What can we
Mm.
do for, and for me it's because my daughter is 3.5, right?
Mhm.
If she's 10, 15 years, she's going to be 18 going into 20.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be completely honest, like, do I think the current church is built for her when she's 18? I want to say yes. I really, really want to say yes. But I don't, like, we just don't know.
Mm.
Because who's going to be leading that church then, right? Like, all of my pastoral mentors will be far too old. And if they're still there in 15 to 18 years, like, will they really, like, can we really trust their perspective in the world based upon where the world will be? So again, I have no idea. And
Mm.
you know, I don't know if that's part of my story or whatnot, but it's definitely something that has, I find myself having more of that conversation more so now. And part of it is because I have the freedom and the ability to do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like there isn't the sort of accountability of the church that I'm pastoring currently, right? And so there's no accountability to that. So I can, I can play in the sandbox as much as I want
Yes.
without, finding myself being problematic for my
Interesting.
current community, right?
I don't know. I don't know if ministry is a done deal for you yet,
No,
Andrew.
and I told this to Mimi. I was like, Mimi, whenever we have these conversations, like I'm like, hey, listen, we have to stop talking about it because the next conversation will lead to, well, why don't we do something? Or like,
Yeah.
why don't we,
Yeah.
figure out how to do it? And that's why I literally always tell Mimi, I was like, we have to just stop talking right
Yeah.
now and right? Because if it's out in the world, like we're
That
held.
is so
I feel
funny.
accountable to the things that we kind
Which
of
is
put
a
out there.
good
So,
characteristic to have,
yeah,
by
I
the
get it.
way.
I get it.
But
So,
hey, so I want to kind of go back to what you
mhm,
mentioned before, and only because I feel like it is a struggle with a lot of young people today, including myself. But I'm curious to what you think too, because as you were talking about it, I'm like, oh, is this a cultural thing? Like,
mhm,
is it an Asian American thing? And what I want to talk about is you're talking about like your career and your identity
yeah,
like being one, and like that's just who, like you have to separate that, like you're Andrew, you're not Pastor Andrew
yeah,
necessarily, right? And
sure,
even myself, right? Like I think motherhood has done that to me, right? Like
mhm,
before even my role, whether it's a ice skating coach um or a minister at church, like I everything stopped when I got pregnant,
mhm,
and there was this like weird, like overwhelming sense of purposelessness, like,
yeah,
and like
yeah,
I but then I know that's not true, and I know that being a mom in itself is something different,
yeah,
and uh I've, in the last 5 years had to learn what it means to find identity not just in the things that I do,
sure,
right? But like, yeah, I mean, do you think, now that I'm thinking, I'm like, maybe our parents always taught us to strive and to
sure,
work and to be
sure,
something.
yeah.
So do you think that's a American thing, a Korean thing, a cultural thing? What do you think?
I think it has to be a combination of, and this is the easy answer, like all of that, right?
Yeah.
But definitely, I think our cultural background plays a significant role
Mm.
in that, a lot of people, our age have gone through the journey of finding themselves in a career path and success, for lack of better terms. And some of us have been incredibly maybe not lucky, but incredibly diligent in finding that and being able to balance that well. And
Mm.
others may find them still searching for that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or being able to fulfill the identity sense. What is it? Being able to fulfill the identity aspect of their career, in different ways.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
there's the unique people who've been able to just be, what, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to make that happen, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
generally, you see that with a lot of the creatives in the Asian American space, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
no first gen parent is going to be like, oh, I want them to, you know, go and be in media or, be
A YouTuber.
a YouTuber or, or anything like that, but some of our friends, I think some of our mutual friends have been able to find such success and
Yeah.
purpose. But, that journey is not easy at the
No.
end of the day, right? And I don't want to say it's true just for Asian Americans, but I think there is a sense of accomplishment that we have to hit
Mm.
before we have the freedom to do the things that we want to do, right?
Mm.
Maybe it's, I'll be able to buy my own house and find a career that's well paying. And now when I have the luxury and flexibility to be more risky with my career path, like I can do that, but then I also know, like, being in 2022, like there's a lot of opportunity to be able to, look at culture and be like, I am successful, even though it may not be, your typical definition of success.
Yeah.
And, you know, and for me, it was a lot of it was when those two things clashed, when
Mhm.
identity and career clashed,
Mhm.
is when I realized like, oh, I gotta figure this out,
Mm.
right? And that kind of led me into whole like my relationship with my parents, my relationship with my brother, and again, therapy did a lot for me to be able to figure that part out for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say, yes, it does have a lot to do with our background,
Yeah.
but then, I would say like that gave me a lot of my identity as well, if that
Right.
makes
Right.
sense,
No,
right? Like
no, it
it's
makes
not all
sense.
negative. It's not an
Yeah.
entirely negative thing.
Yeah.
Um, maybe sometimes when it comes to me being a dad, for instance, right? Like I know I'm a
Mm.
dad, but because of the transition, I know like this isn't my entire life, right? Like I owe it to my daughter to be more than just her dad,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and that's the same thing I think my wife tries to do, and we just try to balance, and that's not the same case for everyone.
Mm.
But one of the things that I've been able to see is life being far more fulfilling
Mhm.
because I get to look beyond sort of the lowest hanging fruit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like if I cling to me being a dad because that's the most important thing in my life, there's going to be a day where I know my daughter's not going to need me as her dad, right? Like, and I don't want to have to deal with that identity crisis then because who knows where I'm going to be in life. But to be
Mhm.
able to say, you know what, like she's the most important thing in my life right now for sure, but that doesn't sort of define my life
Oh,
at
that's
this juncture,
good.
if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
And
no, that makes sense. I'm like speaking to me right
you know what I'm
now.
talking about? Like, and people ask me, it's like, oh, fatherhood and other things. And the one thing I always pick up is when I look at my daughter, like, I'm trying to see, I'm trying to raise her to be a 30-year-old, right? Like, where do I
Mm.
want to see her as a 30-year-old, as
Mhm.
opposed to just making sure she's like the best 4-year-old currently?
Mm.
Because I know that when she's 30, she won't need me as a dad.
Mhm.
She'll
Mhm.
probably, hopefully, she's on a career path where it's just as fulfilling and
Mm.
I can support that. But,
Mhm.
you know, we have the luxury of being able to continue on our own career because of luxuries that our parents afforded us to have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that it's so different, and I think it's a unique time for our generation to be able to figure out what it looks
Yes.
like, if that makes
No,
sense.
it makes perfect sense. I feel the same way. Like what a luxury it is that I can struggle with my identity and not being, attached to a career because yeah, it truly is. Like it's a luxury and I'm grateful for it. But sorry, I feel like
No,
I've been keeping you a long time.
I
Are you
love this. I
good?
could do this all day.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Um so like uh I guess okay, do you have any advice like
Yeah.
for people, right? Because we haven't really talked much about your job, like your
Sure.
current
Sure.
job, but at the same time, it sounds amazing.
Yeah. So let me give you a run. So basically, in my job, we have a growing company so currently we have 54 stores across the country.
Okay.
They want to get to 80 stores in the next 3 years. And so golf is growing and it's an industry that a lot more people are getting into.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to obviously be the number one, retailer and provider of apparel and clubs and maintain sort of being the tip of the spear when it comes to those things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for my job, what I hope or what I see as being my role is to help facilitate again communication with stores, but not from a merchandising perspective, but like with people. Because at
Right.
the end of the day, each store has anywhere from 40 to 50 employees.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly to a church, like you want them to develop, you want their career paths a certain way. And for me, like I envision somebody who's looking to grow their career in the PGA Tour Superstore, like how do I assist in that process for
Mm-hmm.
them? And I
Mm-hmm.
know it starts with developing a higher caliber leader, and working with our operations and our managers to be able to provide support in whatever way that we can,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
it's interesting when I interviewed for the job, they're saying like, "Hey, you may have to manage over 2,000 employees," and I'm like, "Dude, that's hyperbole. That's just what everyone says." But in reality is like when I go and visit other stores, even if I'm like in a different city, I'm like, oh, I want to go see the PGA store there
Uh-huh.
just to see who's working. Like I feel compelled to like know everybody's name, and maybe that's the pastoral side of me. Like obviously I'm not going to learn 2,000 names, but knowing the support and the role that I have as, and maybe I'm overthinking, kind of my job here, but I know that sort of my work will help their experience and their abilities to grow. Um, and then better help them do their job so that obviously the better they can do their job, the more opportunities that they're going to have within the company and stuff like that. And
I
so,
mean, I know I keep repeating the same things over and over again, but I just really can't get over the fact that like because we are people of faith is I'm
yeah,
using God, but yeah, like how God has just set up this transition for you
oh, it's amazing.
because like I mean, I remember when I first met you
Yeah,
and like right off the bat, you were an extreme extrovert,
yeah,
people person, and you just go all in from day one, I
yeah,
feel like.
yeah, yeah,
And like we had just met, even though we were acquainted just
for
through
sure.
other people, mutual friends.
Side
Like
note,
yeah, I felt like I knew you for years.
yeah,
And I
I saved her life too. Side
oh
note,
god.
she passed out in the sun because she's anemic. I don't know if that's public knowledge, but I don't know if you still are struggling with that.
No,
But
I'm not. I'm not. I'm better
uh,
now.
when she was younger, for this is for your listeners, when you were younger, you struggled with anemia, correct?
Correct.
And
Correct.
we were at a retreat and we were
Yes.
walking up a hill and it was hot because it was in Southern California and you literally passed out.
And you know what's so funny? Like
Yeah,
you mentioned this when we met up
yeah.
last time and I completely forgot about it.
Never forget. I'll never forget because that's the first time I've ever seen anybody pass out.
Like I just passed out.
Yeah, like we were walking, you're like, oh, I don't feel good. And then you kind of sat down, and then all of a sudden your head just rolls back. And I'm like holding you, and I'm just kind of like, what is happening? Because again, like you said, we were acquaintances. I think we had some mutual friends or something
Yeah.
like that. We're both sort of volunteering at this retreat. And then I think I had a radio or
In
something.
California, by the way, which is so
I was like,
crazy.
Blair just passed out. I think we need some help. And then I remember having to, if nobody's ever picked up a like dead weight, I don't know,
Right.
I don't remember. You weren't a heavy person back then, but like a dead weight, like nothing, like that's heavy.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh. I'm so embarrassed.
I think I was 20 years old. I think I was 20, and you might have
Yeah.
been 19. You
I
might
mean,
have been a
I was
sophomore at the time.
18 probably.
And it was just like, yeah, I saved her life because she would have just laid there in the sun.
Yeah, you did. You
I
saved my
did.
life. And then I woke up. I recall waking up and there were several people like standing over me.
Exactly. Yeah, because they were like, I wonder what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think you drank like a half thing of Pedialyte,
Oh my
just to kind of get
gosh.
just rehydrated and stuff.
So
But, yeah.
crazy.
Sorry to
Okay,
derail you from.
no.
Yeah,
No, it's fine. But all that to say, he's a people person, and if you ever are in a situation where your life is in danger, he will be
yeah.
there to help
I'm the
you.
one. I'm the one. I'll be there.
But anyways, what I was going to say before you
Uh-huh.
interrupted was yes, it's incredible how God has set up your life because I know that you are a people person. But oh man, what was I gonna
I'm
say?
sorry about that. I'm sorry. You were gassing me up too, but then
I
I was like,
was.
I can't let that. I
I
can't
was.
let this moment pass. But I look back on it and I recognize, man, yeah, God's hand is for sure in that, right?
Yes.
But I do understand, like it. I don't want to say it could have been anything. Like that's not what I'm saying. It's like, yes, I love the fact that it's at the PGA Tour Superstore, and I love because it's golf and people and so on and so forth. But I think there was a time in that time of my life, there was such clarity for me to say, like, you know what, like I know where I'm headed towards. I don't
Mhm.
know what it's going to be, but there's a lot of peace there.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
because of that peace, I think it allowed for me to recognize, the situation I'm in really was something that I loved.
Yeah. Okay, I remember what I was gonna say. Sorry. Okay, so
Oh,
like
good,
what I was
good.
gonna say was the setup, right? Like you just never know. And
Yeah,
I just feel like it would be um like we have to talk about the fact that everything in your life,
Mhm.
whether you feel like it's purposeless or purposeful or not, like I feel like your life right now currently is an example of you just never know, right? Like
Yeah.
your pastoral care experience has led you to the dream job, really, for you
Yeah.
currently in corporate world.
Yeah.
And my life is very similar. I, as a figure skater, I had no idea. I thought it was like just like horrible the way my career ended. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, because of my experience, because of what I studied in college, is why right out of college I landed
Mhm.
a job, doing sports television because of that, right? But I would never at 23 have
Yeah,
imagined that would have
for
what would
sure.
have happened, right? And so but I hope this is an encouragement to people listening that maybe you feel like what does the future hold?
Yeah.
And I hope that Andrew's story, my story, and all of the stories that have been on the podcast can
Mhm.
be just almost proof, like proof that there is purpose in everything, even if Andrew's life didn't transition the way that it did. We'd have to believe that even that was with purpose. And so with that being said, Andrew, do you have any life advice other than all the pieces of advice that you've given so far? I really liked
Yeah.
what you said about like talking to people around you about
Mhm.
a decision,
Yeah.
people that you trust that are close to you.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of people fail to do that, honestly,
Yeah.
because or I don't know. I think I would. It would be hard for me,
Yeah.
honestly, because I think I have this idea of, well, I know it's my life, my
Yeah. Yeah.
pride and stuff, but that was really good. That's really good advice. But do you have any other kind of advice?
I think if you are in a situation where you're looking to transition, like make a massive transition career wise,
Mhm.
like I'd highly suggest seeing a counselor to just help
Mm,
organize some of the emotions, right?
yes.
Especially as Asian Americans, like we're so intimately connected to making the right choice, especially when it comes to our careers. Like I'd hate for that to be um or like having unorganized emotions. I'd hate for that to be the reason why you may or may not make a choice that could be incredibly fulfilling, right?
Mm,
um like I remember having a conversation with a young person way back when, and just kind of asking him, like, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up, like when you get
mm,
out of college? And I remember that individual was just like, I really want to get into media. I really want to kind of, become an actor, and talking a lot about the space where it was just like, for a lot of Asian Americans, like we're not aspiring to do that, right? We're not going to say, I want to be a thespian, or I want to be, truly want to go and be a musician or anything like that. And for whatever reason, I was like, listen, if you want to do it, like, what do you need to do to get there? Right.
mm,
And I'm not saying like I'm the reason behind that. I say that to myself, but I'll never say that to them. But like recognizing and watching the grind, and just
mm.
being a bit of being there to be able to, what's the word, like bounce conversations and more so
Yeah.
emotions. Like I think that goes such a long way,
Mm,
because whatever decision people will end up, whether you staying or leaving, like you do so with such peace that it really helps you see the clarity behind, whatever the next step is. Right.
yeah.
And obviously for me, my transition, I look at my like transition from going into passer and going into sort of this corporate retail space. Like people will be like, oh, it's a big transition. But like you had said, like I can see where the breadcrumbs are, for lack of better
Mhm.
terms, right? And I
Yeah.
don't want to assume everybody is of faith, but if you're on the fence, like man, I can't deny God wasn't a part of that.
Mhm.
And I look at now the conversation that I have with my friends who are leading EMs, and be like, what we were taught to tell people on like what does it mean to like live out your faith in a workplace, like was the worst advice I think we could have given people sometimes,
Mm.
because like I'm now like in a space where I'm working like in a quote unquote secular space,
Yeah.
and I'm like, man, some of the advice that I gave like other peers, like dude, this could never happen, this could
Mm.
never work, or other things like that. And And so it's interesting because I still, ministry is not a job that I put behind me,
Right.
but there's definitely, God will open up those spaces. And that's the uniqueness of being a pastor. Like you can be a pastor in a lot of different places.
Mm.
But again, for like my only, I guess, last advice would be, if you're looking at transitions or if you're looking at a different career path or you're looking at, hey, where should I start my career? Like, man, talk with somebody to help organize some of those questions. And again, not like your best friend who's going to tell you what you want to hear, but like maybe it's that person that you don't like talking to because they're too honest. And sometimes that just kind of helps all of us have a broader perspective that becomes more beneficial than doing what might feel like to be the most comfortable thing. So
Yeah.
again, I don't think that's anything, breathtakingly new, but for me, that was exactly what helped me continue my career, if that makes sense. Obviously, doing different things, but found myself in a situation where I'm still utilizing the giftings God's blessed me with and still allowed for me to be in a position to be a part of ministry in a different capacity.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what this podcast does for people, including myself, honestly, is when people come on and kind of give like permission,
Yeah.
like, and I think thankfully these days a lot of Asian Americans are exploring mental health opportunities, right?
Yeah.
And seeking professional help. And man, what a privilege that is, honestly. Because, like, I
Sure.
feel like, again, growing up, at least our generation, we weren't taught to, like, talk freely and extrovertedly process
Hmm.
whatever it is we're feeling and thinking in a way that, other than, like, with your friends, I
Yeah.
guess, but, like, getting someone that has the tools, like the equipping to
Yeah.
help you process and really come to a conclusion that is healthy, and you can come to a place where, yeah, you are passionate about something. And
Sure.
so yeah, no, I appreciate the permission that you just gave to all of us
Hmm.
to really be okay with transition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And sometimes we may have just been in the same place for too long, right?
Yeah.
But, I'm not saying that we're all having to transition, right? And it's
No.
really your own story
Mm-hmm.
and it's one of those things that when you know you're in the right spot, like you feel like you're in the right spot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
trusting that instinct more than
But it's
anything else.
still so scary, but yes.
It is. It's scary. If it's not scary, then I don't think it's worth. I don't think it's
Oh
worth it,
gosh.
right?
Oh
So,
gosh. Well, Andrew, I always ask people the same question. Would you be
mhm,
willing to chat with somebody that maybe has questions about your story, or even just like transition or anything,
absolutely.
maybe even, I don't know, working at the PGA store?
100%, 100%. If you are in well, professionally speaking, if you are in corporate retail, or if you are looking for a different job, like I know our company is looking for higher caliber, talented people,
Yes.
marketing, merchandising, all of that. You do have to move to Atlanta though, right? But it's not too bad. It's not too bad here.
Yeah. No, it's great
But
here.
yeah, on the other side, like I'm always willing to have these conversations and to talk through kind of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
really, at the end of the day. And so, I don't know if you put my contact on there, but you can and post whatever. I'd love to just chat and help in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Yeah, you guys, I can truly attest to Andrew being somebody that you can talk to, relate with, and really feel comfortable just chatting about anything. He is, I'm not just saying this, I truly mean it. Him and his wife and their family truly is a family to, uh, yeah, look up to. I feel like they have a lot to offer, and such great. They've really experienced life in a way that is deeper than most. And you can hear about Mimi and Andrew's story more on Mimi's podcast. They've actually have their own podcast
No, we
called.
don't. We had one. We don't
No, but
currently
it still
have
exists.
one.
It's out there.
It's still out
It's
there.
still out there. Growing families, right?
It is. It's called the Growing Family Podcast, and it's we talked about doing it again. Um,
You
I
should. You
don't
should
know.
do it
I
again.
know.
Because I also know you went on David Shin's podcast and said you were going to do it again.
There was a lot. There was a lot going on when I went on his podcast to talk through it and stuff like that. But it's in the works. It's one of those things where kind of talking through the transition stuff. Like it adds just a lot more meaning. And
Yeah.
I love doing this. But
Yeah.
Blair, I appreciate your kind words. Truly, like it's I'm humbled and thankful that whatever, more so Mimi and my brother and family, like whatever impact that we can make, it's one of those things that I'm glad that we get to be a part of. But again, like we love doing it with people.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm always open to talking. Blair actually she has 107 other people rather you talk to before me, but
Oh
it's
my
cool.
gosh.
That's the last time I'll bring that up. But no, it's awesome. Thank you for the opportunity to share. And I know that hopefully there's no more transitions in my life. But if there is, you'll be the first to know.
I can't wait. And
Yeah.
we'll have a part 2 with Andrew Song for sure.
Yeah, 300 maybe, something like that.
Well, you guys, feel free to reach out. You can DM me on social media or you can email me at podcastwigu@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, y'all. Until next time. Bye. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye. Thank you.